Thanks so much for tuning in. You know, we're going to be talking about something that's very important in our lives, and that's the education of our children. And recently, there were proposed radical changes in Kenya's education system. In the studios, we're joined by Dr. Jane Imbunya. She's a member of the Presidential Working Party on Educational Reforms in Kenya. And you all have been going around the country since September, right, Dr. Hari?
Since September last year.
Yes. You went around, you discussed, you had open forums, you had talks with stakeholders, and now you have proposed some radical changes in Kenya's education system. What does that mean? What does that entail?
Thank you so much. Good morning, Kenyans, and I'm happy to be here on Hot 96 to share this beautiful moment in our country together with you. Now, as Jeff has rightly put it, we have just gone through a big national conversation. And this national conversation was all about our education system in Kenya. And I happened to be on the Presidential Working Party as a member. And indeed, from the time of appointment to the point where we were now presenting the report to the head of state, we went through the 47 counties in Kenya, where we engaged with Kenyans, we spoke to Kenyans, we listened to them. And just besides the 47 counties, we had the 48th county, which was the diaspora. And indeed, at the point of inception of the party, we were going through a crossroad. There was a major debate in Kenya whether we should continue having CBC or not. But at this point, we spoke to Kenyans. And in our report, we made recommendations. And in this show, I want to confirm to all the Kenyans that what is in this report is what we heard from different stakeholders, and and this stakeholder also included the president of this country. And that based on our terms of reference, it was apparent that we had to overhaul the education system in Kenya. And maybe if I could speak to this one for one more minute. We were looking at the education system in Kenya right from pre-primary to the tertiary level. And in it, we came up with very many recommendations. And I want to say within one show like this one, it's not humanly possible for us to go through all those recommendations. But however, there are those key recommendations that I would use maybe 2 minutes or so to speak to. The first one is that for CBC to succeed at all levels of education, it was important for us to integrate the key tenets of CBC within all the levels of education. What do I mean by that? Very many people now are talking about the return of National Youth Service. I would say it is the return of National Youth Service, but in a more structured manner. For instance, we now have value-based education, which is supposed to be integrated at all levels. We have community service learning, which initially was just at primary. Now it has to be spread through right from pre-primary to university. We also have parental empowerment and engagement, one of the pain points of CBC, especially among many Kenyans. And then we have the pertinent and contemporary issues. So this is, of course, during the discussion, I'll speak more about it to try and explain to the Kenyans why this is a major reform. Another major reform is that one of now putting a clear structure into the CBC system of education. Initially, we had 2 years of pre-primary, 6 years of primary, 3 years of senior, and 3 years of junior. But then that structure was not complete because university and tertiary did not have a place yet. That we did put. Another major and radical recommendation I can talk about is the discontinuation of categorization of schools, where we had national schools, county schools, extra county, and so on. It used to put a lot of unnecessary pressure on the Kenyan population. And now with CBC, we have removed that nomenclature of categorization, and what we have are schools dependent on pathways. And if I could quickly rush on to the roles, the duplication of roles between Ministry of Education and TSC. When we went into the field, we realized that there is a very important component of education that was heavily suffering in the whole of Kenya, and this is the quality assurance, whereby both the ministry and TSC were playing the quality assurance role. And now there was a problem on when the reports are made, recommendations are written. Who acts on it? And that duplication meant that schools were suffering. And maybe to move a bit to speak about special needs education. You know, this is one area since independence that had not been looked into with all the interest that it deserves. But as I sit in this studio today, I wish to let all Kenyans know that now our children in the special needs schools stand a better chance, to gain from the education system in this country and to benefit just like any other normal child, because the capitation and all the other structures that are supposed to create an enabling environment for education to happen in those schools have been clearly addressed in this report.
Dr. let me ask you, what were some of the major reasons that influenced changing of the curriculum? Like you've mentioned earlier on, maybe there was a lot of pressure, that's why we are removing these nomenclature of schools, but what are the other reasons that informed you to make these reforms?
Okay, maybe if I may get you clear, I think your question is two-pronged.
Yeah.
Are we supposed to be addressing the reasons why we had the paradigm shift in the education system, or maybe the reasons that informed the creation of the working party?
No, like what made these changes come into effect? Because we had the first one you said, and then we had 844, and then we moved to 8.
All right, okay.
So for a parent to understand, why are we changing these things?
Okay, thank you so much, Nick. I understand your question. Now, why did we move from 844 to the current education system, which is the competency-based education? First of all, Kenya is part of the global world. Mm-hmm. We are part of the 21st century world, whereby we have the SDGs. The SDGs have informed the way education is now run in the world, because we are all working towards the 21st century learner. And for us to attain the 21st century learner, we first of all have to ensure that we have the 21st century class. And for that reason, the Odhiambo Commission, the Odhiambo Task Force that looked at the education system in Kenya to align it to the 2010 Constitution as well as the 2030 vision for this country, it became very apparent that the type of education system we were having at that time, which is 844, which is in its final lane, could not meet and cannot meet the requirements of the 21st century. Therefore, that necessitated a study to be carried out on the needs, on what Kenya really needs to help us solve our current problems. And for that matter, from that needs assessment, it became very apparent that we have to move to the next education system that can assist our country. But let me say one thing. As a curriculum expert, I wish to let everybody listening to me this morning know that a curriculum has a lifespan. It has a lifespan, like I do have. Nick and Jeff, you can never live forever. It gets to a moment when you expire. So it got to that moment within our education system that we had to move on because the 844 system had served its purpose. But then, moving forward, it could not be able to give our learners a knee jerk into the 21st century. It is the same thing that happened at independence. That education system is what I benefited from, but got to a point when it had lived its importance. It was supposed to help us get nurses, get doctors, and so on at independence time. Then we had to move to 844, and it is only time that we also embrace CBC.
Okay, is CBC being embraced, Dr. Tari? Is it being embraced, or is there resistance?
That's a very good question, Jeff. I think the atmosphere in the country can tell you something. When I first came into this, in fact, if I can refer to that particular conversation, when I first came into your studio, we were at a point of trying to explain and let Kenyans see the benefits of CBC, because the noise was too loud. But now the conversation has changed. I'm coming into this studio today for us to speak about the recommendations in the report that we have from the Presidential Working Party. What does that tell you? That we are at another level, when as a country we have realized that this is something that we have to do together for us to succeed.
Yes.
And that it's not only Kenya, even South Sudan that just got its independence the other day. It is in its second year of implementation of CBC. That is the way the whole world is going. It's a paradigm shift. So we have to move with that paradigm. We cannot be left behind. So to go back to your question and to be very accurate about it is that, okay, CBC has attained acceptable levels of, I would say, acceptable levels of embracing it within the country. But however, we still have to work towards all of us getting into the same ship and singing the same song of CBC.
Let me ask you, is that also being implemented all across? Because CBC mostly associated with the primary school. What about the tertiary level institutions, universities? Are we going to have a change in their curriculum? Because, universities sometimes have some very outdated courses.
Yes.
So when they get into the market, it's like it's been 4 years down the drain.
Thank you. When I began the conversation, I said this report and this recommendation is a game changer. Whether universities like it or not, I'm a university lecturer myself, we have to move towards CBET, what is known as competency-based education and training. This is a must-do, and it is going to happen in the universities, I think close to 2027, 2028 there. We just have to tighten our belts, because the cohort that we have now, who are in the junior school, doing grade 7, by the time they move to the universities, they have to move with the CBET curriculum. Otherwise, then we cannot be able to teach.
So what kind of things will be there in the university curriculum?
In the universities also, still the same one. What I think all of us commonly know as CATs will change. We don't have CATs anymore. We have CATs with a double T. Continuous assessment, tests, and tasks. So it already tells you that we have to change. The medium of delivery will also change, because CBC is flexible. It is learner-centered learning. So there mustn't be in the confines of a classroom. That has to be done. The programs also have to change to cope with the current learning areas that we have in CBC. Maybe, having asked me that question, please allow me to say one thing about it. Whether universities like it or not, they are changing. Why? Because even in senior school, there is the introduction of a capstone project.
What's that?
Wonderful. Capstone project is where 135 hours of these learners in senior school is on projects, and it is community projects. The learners in the senior schools together with the communities where the schools are, by use of research skills, identify a problem. And together with the community, they work towards solving that problem. And the capstone project is supposed to play two roles. One, to enable these students already use the skills that they have learned into solving real community problems. And the second phase of it is to enhance what we call job shadowing, where if their project is on working in a studio like this, then you, Nick and Jeff, you move into those schools, spend your days with those learners as you work towards a project within the institution or within the community. So two things will happen there, ensuring that these skills are sharpened, and secondly, for them to get an opportunity to job shadow. So back to your question, whether we like it or not, of course, with the current classes of the 844, we continue with that system to the point they graduate.
So it's more of like a purposeful internship, but at an early age.
In fact, that is the word. It is internship, whereby we are going to get very high skilled labor from these students. And number two, we'll not have anybody queuing up for interviews. I mean, we'll have people queuing up for interviews, but for sure, those queues will reduce. Because after that, you already have your job.
Yeah, or you can create your own kind of jobs also, yeah.
In fact, by the time you're getting there, you're already earning a living from it. And that is the type of Kenya we want.
Before you get to university, let's talk about the transition from primary to junior secondary. That's been very controversial. In fact, in some places, it looks like it's not working. There's no capacity. There's no space. There's always that. Where do the graduates go? Do they go into boarding school, into secondary schools? Do they stay in the same primary school? Where does the junior secondary school approach?
Thank you very much, Jeff. I'm really happy to hear you articulate that concern in that way, because this is the national conversation that we are speaking about. Now, we have introduced what we call a comprehensive school. Comprehensive school has learners from PP1 to grade 9. All of them are domiciled in one place with one head teacher, but the lower primary has got a deputy who assists the head teacher, and then the primary has got one deputy, and then the junior school has another deputy. Why is it important to do that? It's for many reasons. We had classes, now we have grades. And I hope that your producer will allow me to ask this one and to say it in Swahili. There is daraja and darasa. Mick, what do you understand darasa to be?
Darasa is a room where you sit and learn, the classroom.
And daraja, Jeff? Daraja. I wish to use the two Swahili words. One is a class and the other one is a grade. So one is a class and the other one is a bridge. So what is a daraja? If you're crossing a daraja,
it's a bridge.
Transitioning from one to another.
And you've used some skill to do that, and you have made a milestone. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So now this is a comprehensive school because we only have grades. So at every level you're making a milestone. And this milestone has to be achieved in a comprehensive manner. Definition of the word comprehensive in English is complete or broad. So they're together so that we can have the completeness of learning and gaining milestones. That's number one. And number two, it's also to help us cut on costs so that we have enough learning materials in these schools where they are. Number three, is it only Kenya doing it? No. We benchmarked and benchmark around the world. The issue of classes, the issue of primary, secondary, and so on is gone because we are looking at a 21st century learner. Number 4, why did we do this? There was already a lot of confusion. A primary school hosting a junior school. And therefore, let us make it complete and finally achieve the 100% transition.
Yeah, but the juniors, the JSS kids, they feel that they're being used as guinea pigs.
It's unfortunate that they may be feeling that way, and if there's any of the GS, the junior school learners listening to me this morning, I want to assure you that you are a special generation to this nation because you are the pioneers of this particular education system, and that because you are pioneering, there are bound to be a bit of these teething problems. But being our children, we want you to understand that you have had to go certain hardships in the process of us transitioning, but all that we have looked into it, and most of you spoke to us when we went into the counties. We heard you, and I assure you that with the recommendations that we have, even the small teething problems that you have had, when you open the schools in the new semester, in the new term, these issues will not be there. And look at yourself with a lot of pride, because you'll go down into the books of history as our firstborn children who opened a totally new paradigm shift of education in Kenya. And you are courageous, you are resilient, we have come this far.
Is it a matter of a lot of parents just not understanding the future and what this comes with? Because it's parents who are normally resistant because they are used to a certain way of life. Like 1989 is when what was yours called? 732 something.
763.
That's when it ended. So then as guys continued 844, then it's ended. Then now this new generation CBC, then it'll end. Then it'll be something else. Is it just the parents that just don't seem to grasp this information so that they can share with others?
Yeah, and I'll say this, even if that is the way the parents feel, we also have to listen to them and understand why they feel that way. But I can assure you some of it, Jeff, is just in the mindset. We live in Kenya. Some of us live in the villages, where there are no really private junior schools, and learning is going on. Of course, there may be a few problems here and there, but I want to say this. The government is very keen on it. One of the major issues have been teachers. Now, we need about 100,000 plus teachers. Already, the government has sent 56,000 teachers, 30 on regular employment and about 20-something on internship. So the issue of teachers has been mitigated and will continue being mitigated. And I believe another big area why there's been all this talk about junior secondary was because of the subject load, the learning areas. There were too many, so the few teachers are to teach so many of those learning areas, but that we have worked on, and those have been reduced.
And, so now if you join a teacher's training college, you pick like 2, 3, 4 subjects, and then that's what you teach. Is that what you're saying?
In fact, within the new CBET, what I spoke of CBET, competency-based education training, even the teacher training model has changed. The way they are trained, how they are trained, and the learning areas have changed.
Yeah, but one of the concerns of parents is that these teachers who are being brought in, one of them is teaching an average of 14 classes. How does that work?
Jeff, I can assure you, some of these things, people say them, but when you go to the ground, you find that the situation is very different.
How so?
There is no head teacher or a deputy head teacher who can give one teacher 14 learning areas, because it's not humanly possible to do so. It isn't. Even if just calculate, even just look at it, how many hours are our children in class? Those are about 8 to 7, between 7 to 8 hours. when were those 14 learning areas covered? So some of these are scarecrows, statements I would say are used especially for the people who are still resistant to the new education system, the paradigm shift, and they come up with all these things. But however, from the beginning, we have been saying this, that the teachers who are teaching Standard 8 and Standard 7 can still be of assistance with the grade 7, because it is basically almost the same thing but done differently.
So you want to give them more work?
It cannot be more work. Jeff, look at it. Are we still having more learners being enrolled in the 844 system? No. The learners that are being enrolled now are being enrolled under the competency-based education. So there is no, I wouldn't think it is more work. What is happening here, and I want to say with a lot of emphasis, is that our teachers now have to come out of the old skin. You know, before we were using things like marking keys, schemes of work. You know, it is a rigid document, it is static, it's not dynamic. So the teacher can use that very scheme of work for the entire period you'll be teaching that particular class. But CBC is removing us from that comfort zone as teachers to ensure that instruction is tailor-made for that particular learner, the interests and the abilities of that learner. And I think that is where most of our teachers are having problems. But however, in the next 6 months or so, this is not going to be a point of concern anymore, because all the teachers are going to be retooled. Kenya as a nation, we are retooling all our teachers. And the word retooling just means the same tool that you have, we are just sharpening it to give you more expertise on how to use what you have to manage the new system of education that we have. And basically that is what has been ailing the learning, and we are going to do it as a country. We are all going to do it.
So I guess basically it's just for the teachers to appreciate each student, because you can explain something and then student 1 understands it differently, student 2 understands it differently, but when you read what they have written about, basically it's kind of the same, but in their own perspective, so something like that.
Thank you so much, Nick, and I take you to KICD's position statement.
Yes.
CBC, you have to meet every learner at the point where they are, and you have to nurture each and every learner's potential. So it is not one size fits all. It is tailor-made to fit the needs of each particular learner. Therefore, it is differentiated instruction, where each learner has to be you have first of all to identify the potential, and then you nurture that potential. But I have to maybe add something else on this particular aspect. The teachers, what you have is good enough. We only need to do what we call retooling. And I like to emphasize this point by using a very common example. We have been having manual cars. Manual cars. Yeah. We have the automatic cars. We didn't have to go back to driving school. We just read the manuals and there we were. Let's look at our archaic TV sets, where you had to stand up to go and mechanically put it on and off. Now we got the remotes, and you only read the manual. So the retooling is like just taking these teachers back into that space where you retool them, they read the manuals. But the beauty of it is, unlike before, when these teachers had to come to Nairobi for retooling, this is now going to take a new model known as the rapid descent. It is right from mashinani. We are saying CBC is an education system where the teacher has to manipulate the environment. So we need to get to the environment of the teacher in Kakamega. How do you manipulate it? And let learning take place. We get to the teacher in Wajir, because these are two different areas with very different characteristics. How do you manipulate? And therefore, I will ask all Kenyans.
Dr. Let's talk a bit about money, costs. Once upon a time, during P.W.P.E.R.K's time, primary education was free. Now with CBC, every time parents are being told, cough up for this, cough up for that, there's a lot of money being spent that was, maybe parents didn't anticipate. What's going to happen?
Thank you so much, Jeff. This issue of parental involvement and the requirements have been one of the factors that has made those who believe that CBC is unnecessary and came at the wrong time have been holding on to. But let me answer the question this way. First of all, speaking to the report, because this is the biggest conversation that we have now, there's a recommendation there whereby a capitation for each child within the school or each learner has really been increased. You can imagine now in pre-primary, they are having, pre-primary and primary is about 1,000 and something per child. Junior secondary is 15,000 plus per learner. Senior secondary is about 20 something per learner. And the biggest game changer here is on special needs. Because, for you to educate one special needs child, you need a lot of assistive devices to make learning happen. Those have been given about 18,000 for the day schools and 30-something thousand for the boarding schools. So that, when implemented, will really cushion parents against all these unnecessary expenditures. But however, it boils down to the teacher again. My fellow teachers who are listening to us this morning, we should know that competency-based education is an education that is context-based. And the first thing a teacher should do is to manipulate the environment and get as much of the learning materials from within the environment. And another beauty of CBC is that it is learner-centered learning. Therefore, the learner is the first resource. And therefore, the burden that you are putting on parents is unnecessary. Even though, I should say, when we went into the counties, do you know, we didn't hear so much of what all of us have been hearing out there, the demands the teachers are putting on the parents. So it becomes very difficult also to draw the balance, whether it's just a story, it's a myth, or it's something that is really happening. However, let us manipulate the environment and have learning happen, because we know we are all living in very difficult economic times.
Absolutely. When do we expect this report to be, what's the next step after proposing? What's the next step?
Okay, thank you so much for that particular question. In this report, there is an implementation matrix. And the implementation matrix speaks to who should do what, when should it be done, where should it happen, and at what point should it be completed. So there are some of these recommendations that will take 6 months, but the longest is a year. And just to put a small ray down that one, I wish to remind Kenyans that a curriculum is a contract between the state and its people. And that be the case, we have to have this dialogue all the time about concerning the curriculum, and that a curriculum matures after 5 years. So after every 5 years, I would recommend that moving forward, we should keep having this engagement that has just ended, because it brought to the fore a lot of these issues that sometimes we may overlook, or sometimes we may think are not important, but we just realized how they can impede the progress of a curriculum in a nation.
All right, and the biggest challenge going forward?
The biggest challenge is for us as a nation to embrace change when it comes to education systems, and for us to realize that, as I put it much earlier in the show, an education system has a lifespan and it expires. So when it comes to that moment, let us get together, speak about our country, what is best for our nation, and move together. Maybe this is another point where we had all these misunderstandings and misconceptions about CBC. It was not brought to every Kenyan to understand what it is, look at the strength and the weaknesses of 844 in comparison to the strength and the weaknesses of CBC, so that we all together as a nation move forward. But you cannot blame anybody, because there are many things that happen. All these things are both human and capital intense, and sometimes certain decisions have to be taken for us to move forward.
And 20 years from now, when we look back and reassess what happened at CBC, what are we going to be saying?
The story will be different, because from what we already can see, and of course we even heard from the learners, and if we really have to be very honest with ourselves, we can see the difference between the two education systems. Already the parents of the children in these houses can tell you the difference. One is very assertive, discovers, constructs knowledge, a problem solver, thinks critically, an innovator. And in the system where I belong, and I believe Nick, I think Jeff, you went to another type of education system, it is where everything is so rigid, information is given to you, you duplicate it in an examinations room, you get the certificate and nothing else to do. Where should we be in the next 20 years? Better than China, I believe.